Hi, and welcome to the I Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 66. What can Libs teach us about Powershell? So, Powershell. Libs. Words. Nouns. Verbs. Propositions. Contractions. Functions. Conjunctions. Anyway. Libs. If you don't know what that is because you haven't had the fun experience of traveling in a car with nothing to do in the early 80s and 90s and did not also have a school class assignment to fill them out. Libs is a functional fill-in-the-blank terminology sort of thing. I don't know. It's a game. Basically, you're given sort of this paper that has a story on it with areas to fill in words and nouns. And the way it's supposed to work is it's kind of like a 2-person, 3-person thing, or multiple people, where one person is reading, okay, give me a noun. Okay, give me a verb. Okay, give me a president. Okay, give me the results of the 1986 World Series. Shit like that. Anyway, the whole thing is just you fill in the blank of the word, and the sentence is supposed to make silly sense. That's basically what ad-libs are. You just make these crazy statements or stories through the creation of or implementation of verb and noun and predetermined words. And it's cool because like you can come with some really crazy stuff. It can be really silly, it can be really dark, depending on what the back end of it is. And really it can teach us a whole lot about how scripting in general works, but specifically PowerShell. So PowerShell, if you haven't used it yet or haven't seen it or haven't really been exposed to it, it can be a little daunting. I know when it first came out, back way long ago in the before times, it wasn't really that big of a deal. And it wasn't really terribly useful for a lot of folk, because PowerShell originally wasn't it was seen as a replacement for command line. And command line or bash script, or what do we want to call it for batch script? What do you want to call it for Windows machines? It's basically just how you interact with the operating system directly through command line, through command line arguments, by manually typing in words. And command line, you have to know what the commands are, basically. You have to understand exactly what they are and how to use them, which is not crazy. It's not unheard of that you have to have that, because how else are you going to operate a system without knowing the commands? It's just, you have to know them. But the commands didn't necessarily make sense. dir, to give me the list of all the files in the directory. cd, change directory, to change where I am currently looking at on the file system. Copy, hey, that one makes sense. Move, okay, that one makes sense too. Del, delete, okay, that one makes sense, yeah. Net, okay, I'm going to mess with the network interface. Okay. Net user, okay, what are we doing with user now? Net user password? Oh, that's how I set my password? What the fuck? So, there's hundreds of commands by default in the Windows command line operating system. When it used to be DOS, there were, I don't know, probably 60, 70 base commands, but they all followed that same sort of command line structure. And what PowerShell did is it took a lot of these commands, and originally it just kind of tried to make them more direct. Like, make commands make sense. So like in order to view a directory and its contents, instead of saying dir to get those contents of the directory, what you would say is get child item, get dash child item. And what you're doing in this sort of format, the commands in PowerShell all follow that same format. Get dash child item. So if we dissect that statement right there, what we're saying is get, meaning I want to retrieve something. I want to retrieve some information. And then child item, meaning items that are not the primary item I am looking at the moment. So if we dissect that, it's the verb and noun relationship towards the command that tells us exactly what it does. Child item, you do have to know what the fuck that means, because walking into it, you might not understand what child item means. It could mean a whole lot of different things. It could mean, I want to get children, give me a date. I don't know. There's fucking users will come up with anything when they're trying to be dumb, I think. But anyway, once you understand the terminology, then it really just does become verb and noun to get a command. And so inside of PowerShell, get dash child item will get us the contents of a directory. New dash child item will create a new one. We'll be able to create one. Whereas like delete dash child item will remove, or remove dash child item will remove a child item. It will remove an item. Remove dash item will also remove an item. We have to directly call it, but yes, we can do that. We can do a whole lot of things with PowerShell with this verb and noun, and it doesn't just extend to basic commands like that. The verb and noun format follows all different types of commands, and that's really where PowerShell as a scripting language gets its strength, is that everything kind of follows this very direct and linear logic pattern, so that you as a user don't have to translate what you want very far away from human language. It becomes a little bit easier for you to translate, hey, what I want is this, to get to the end result, instead of having this really complex and complicated batch script that has a lot of percentage signs and pipes and dollar signs and shit like that. You can literally just reference the verb and noun of all of your commands that you want in the order in which you want them to behave. And so originally, that's really what PowerShell was supposed to do. It was supposed to be a replacement for command line, and really that was the only intent of it. Now it's sort of, as we've gotten along through the last few years of computing, and Microsoft has sort of taken on more and more different things and tried to just shove more and more shit into everything that they do. It's become less of a replacement for command line, though it is still that. And it's become more of a universal tool that they've kind of scattered everywhere. In fact, PowerShell is downloadable for just about every operating system to help people make that transition and jump into scripting where they may not have been able to do that before. But also, PowerShell, it goes beyond allowing you to manipulate a single computer, or just the files within, or even changing settings and shit like that on a single computer. With PowerShell, you're able to manipulate just about anything on a network, and you can manipulate it in mass. And that's really where I find the power of PowerShell to just exist. Because if you look at, how you would have to do this normally, you'd have to have a for and when and this whole statement of loops that would be really hard to understand. to get anything done in sort of a mass spectrum in command line. And yeah, of course, you could use another scripting language like Python or something like that, but there is a barrier of entry there. There's a barrier of entry to get into Python. That is, one, I have to go and download it, which can be a daunting task, especially for folks who don't have an internet connection or have the ability to know where to get a good copy of Python. But also, there's a barrier of entry because the language isn't necessarily human readable. Also, fucking your formatting and spacing in Python has to be exact. So there's this barrier of entry for folks. Now, I'm not saying Python's a bad language. It's actually really great, and I may cover it in another podcast. But where the reason why I'm comparing it and even bringing it up is that there's a lot of people who say, well, you should be using Python instead of PowerShell because Python is more powerful and is closer to programming. And it's like, well, no, that's not the intent of PowerShell. You've lost what the intent of PowerShell is. The intent of PowerShell is for you and users, people who need to manipulate data, to be able to create complicated scripts, complicated manipulation of data or targets, and not have to know a great deal about the underlying and underworking conditions and how to do that. Let me give you an example. One of the things you can do with PowerShell is a for loop. For each item in this, I want to do this. And we can represent that whole command string and structure by taking a command, so get dash child item, to get all of the child items in a directory or the directory that you're currently in. And then what you do is you feed it into a pipe, which is literally just you do your command space pipe, and then you do your next command. And what that will do is you are feeding everything from the first command into the second command. And it does it one item at a time. And so one of the really powerful things is, just as an example for a simple script that would be complicated otherwise, you can do a single line where you are saying get child item and then pipe and then rename dash item space dash name is whatever. And then you can rename items in mass without having to do this really complicated script structure to do it. And it's a single line and it's really quick. Once you really understand how PowerShell operates, it becomes really easy to manipulate those items and to perform functions in mass. So, one of the things that we often say, and a lot of people kind of argue about, is that scripting is not programming. And what a lot of tech guys mean by that is that scripting relies on predefined and predetermined commands to build a structured response based on user input. That's really what a script does. But guess what? That is also what fucking programming does. Just where if you look at how scripting works, you're not necessarily taking every single command and generating it from scratch. What you're really doing is you are taking batches of commands and combining them into a straight up framework to then operate. And where this becomes where you blur the line is kind of PowerShell. PowerShell kind of blurs that line, and you can do a whole lot in PowerShell. I have written actually several programs in PowerShell that have GUIs so that my users can do things smarter. And it may not be the quickest way and it may not be the smartest way to do it, but for fuck's sake, with the resources that I had available with me when I made it, it was amazing and it was great. And you can do these sorts of things with PowerShell as you learn it. And one of the things that makes PowerShell, I think, such a great scripting language for Windows machines and other machines down the line as well, is that you can utilize scripts that other people have created and you can understand them. It doesn't take you a whole lot of experience to be able to dissect and investigate a script to know what it does because of that verb noun answer methodology where you're just putting in the words to do some stuff and to come up with a really great story. You don't have to come up with this. You don't have to know everything about what it all does to understand the overall impact of a script. And I think that's really one of the best applications and uses of PowerShell is to sort of educate people and make it easier for them to understand what is being done when they run a script. So if they go and download something, they don't have to know everything about computers. They don't have to learn a programming language in order to tear this script apart. They can really just look at it and go, okay, I can kind of see what this does just based off of the commands that are being run. I know what this fucking does. And that makes PowerShell a much easier thing to use and to understand. So, the power there is that you don't have to make people understand it. You don't have to teach anybody how to read it, because if they can read normal English language, they can probably read what PowerShell does. And so, it's not just limited to stuff you can do on a machine. You can run commands to grab stuff off the internet, to interact with APIs. Some of the scripts that we utilize in-house and in IT, are generated to make our lives easier, to make things a little bit more automated, to resolve and fix problems so that, we're not having to work as hard so that our jobs are easier. And that is also where PowerShell gets a lot of its benefit from, is that you can automate just about anything through PowerShell. If you can do it in Windows, you can do it through PowerShell. And that means you have this really strong tool that you then can basically have users interact or the system interact with itself so that things can be fixed without knowledge, with automation. And where we see a lot of this, and actually one of the best uses of this, is things like password rotations. One of the more complicated scripts that I have running in my organization is a script that goes out to each server in our cluster and changes the password. But it can't just change the password because it doesn't have access to the machine directly. It has to go through an intermediary service. And it does this through an API call through this website. And this API call requires that you identify the system and then identify how you want that system to be altered. And so what we do is we issue this command through API to go up, reach the computer, come back down, take that password, and then put that password into our password manager so that it's shared across all techs in our organization so that we all know what that password is. And it does this daily. And we could have it do it hourly or even minute to minute if we really wanted to. And PowerShell allows me to do that without having to know all of these fucking commands by heart without having to understand a programming language and without having to have a complex understanding of how to interact with a network interface card or how to interact with TCP/IP stacks or any of that shit. I can reference the API. I can tell it I want to do this, and then I can tell it I want to do this, and so on and so forth. So it's step by step by step. There's no loops that I need to really configure 1,600 lines of code just to get through one loop. I can have it run the loops with a single line of code and understand that those loops are going to run in this specific way. I can catch errors so I can understand when shit goes wrong. I can have that piped out to anything I want. I can send a mail message, send-mail message to let me know when things are completed, or I can customize it to do whatever I want. I can customize that mail message to say anything, to include the data about what passwords were changed or whatever. That information is viable and valuable. And this script that probably would take, I don't know, in C# or C++, that would take me 500 lines of code to get done, takes me 60 lines in PowerShell, which still is probably too many. It's probably too many just based on the fact that I could remove some of the spacing, that the white space that I have in that. I can remove my comments. Probably it would bring it down to about 20 lines of code, which is not terrible and really easy to human read. Really easy for a human to read, which is where, that ad libs aspect comes into play, because it's really just plugging in what you want. You plug in your verb, you plug in your noun, you plug in the things that you want to change, and it does. That's what PowerShell does. And so if you want to investigate more into PowerShell, there are a few resources available to you. One of the things that you can go and check out is called PS Gallery. That's PowerShell Gallery. It's a repository of scripts and modules and other things that Microsoft basically curates. There are a ton of GitHub projects for PowerShell, and there are quite a few PowerShell introductions or PowerShell courses that you can take just through GitHub. And if you just look up learning PowerShell GitHub, you'll get those resources. There's a ton, and not any of them. I'm not going to tell you which ones you should go get, because they're all pretty good, and they all go about it a different way. So those are some of the resources that I would suggest you go and look at if you're interested in learning PowerShell. If you're not interested in learning PowerShell because this information is useless to you, well, then you can go fuck yourself. But I hope you guys have a great day.